Papa Panov's Special Day, retold by Mig Holder. A long time ago, almost too long ago to remember, and far away, almost too far away to imagine, in a small Russian village there lived an old shoemaker. His name was Panov, but nobody called him Mr. Panov or even Shoemaker Panov. Wherever he went, he was known as Papa Panov, because everybody loved him. Papa Panov was not very rich. All he owned in the world was one small room where he lived and slept and made his shoes. But neither was he very poor. He had a bed, a stove, an oil lamp, and a great wicker chair. And he had enough money to buy bread and coffee and cabbage to make soup for supper. So Papa Panov was quite happy. Most of the time. Most of the time his eyes would sparkle behind his little round spectacles as he waved a cheery greeting to the people passing by. But on this particular day, it was different. Papa Panov stood sadly at the window of his little shop and thought of his wife who had died many years ago, and of his sons and daughters who had all grown up and gone away. It was Christmas Eve, and everybody in the village was at home with their families. He looked up and down the street and saw windows bright with candles and lamps and Christmas trees. He heard laughter and squeals of children playing games, and the faint smell of roasting meat crept through the cracks around his door of this tiny shop. "Dearie, dearie," said Papa Panov, pulling at his long gray mustache and shaking his head slowly from side to side. But there was no one to bring the sparkle back behind his little round spectacles. Papa Panov sighed a great sigh. Then he carefully lit the oil lamp, went to a high shelf, and lifted down an old brown book. He dusted some scraps of leather off the bench and turned up the lamp. He set a pot of coffee on the stove, sat down in the great wicker chair, and began to read. Now Papa Panov had never been to school and could not read very well, so as he went he ran his finger along the lines, saying the words out loud. This was the story of Christmas. He read how a baby boy, Jesus, was born not in a good warm house, but in a cowshed, because there wasn't any room at the end where his mother and father had asked to stay the night. "Dearie, dearie," said Papa Panov, pulling at his long mustache. "If they had come here, they could have slept on my good bed, and I would have covered the tiny boy with my patchwork quilt. I could have shared my bread and soup with them and played games with the little child and tickled his toes to make him laugh."
Sing for the promise in each new morning. Sing for the hope in a new day dawning. All around is beauty bright. Wake in the morning and sing, my child. Sing, my child. Sing for the promise in each new morning. Sing for the hope in a new day dawning. All around is beauty bright. Wake in the morning and sing, my child. 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 Dancing the joy of the day unfolding. Dance as you work and dance as you're learning. All around is beauty bright. Take in the day and dance, my child. Dance, my child. Dance, my child. Dance, my child. But when troubles come and worry is all that can be found, gather your strength and hear your voice. Sing, my child. Love, love, love like the fresh of love. Love, love, my child. Love, so love. All around is beauty bright. Rest in the and love, my child. Peace in the stillness of the night. Peace in the dreams of your silent delights. All around is beauty bright. Sleep in the night and peace, my child. 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 But when troubles come and worry is all that can be found, gather your strength and hear your voice. Sing, my child. Dance, my child. Love, my child. Peace, my child. Peace, my child. Oh, peace, my child.
Papa Panov got up and stoked the fire. It was becoming quite foggy outside, so he turned up the lamp. He poured himself a mug of coffee and went back to his book. He read how rich men journeyed across the desert to bring him wonderful presents for the little boy Jesus, gold and sweet-smelling spices. "Dearie, dearie," sighed Papa Panov. "If Jesus came here, I wouldn't have anything to give him." Suddenly he smiled, and his eyes sparkled behind his little round spectacles. He got up from the great wicker chair and went over to a high shelf. He lifted down a dusty box tied with string. He opened the box and unwrapped a tiny pair of shoes. Papa Panov held one small shoe in each hand. They were the best he had ever made. He gazed at them for a long time and then carefully tidied them back into the box. He lowered his old limbs down into the chair. "That's what I would have given the baby," he murmured. With a great sigh, he picked up the book once more. Now, whether it was the warmth of the room or whether it was because it was getting late, who can say? But it wasn't long before Papa Panov's bony fingers slid from the page, his little round spectacles slipped from his nose, and he fell soundly asleep. Suddenly, "Papa Panov," said a voice in the room. The old man jumped. "Who is it?" he cried. He could hardly see without his spectacles, but there seemed to be no one there. "Papa Panov," came the voice again. "You wished that I would come to your shop and you would give me a present. Look out from dawn till dusk, and I will come." Then all was quiet. Papa Panov rubbed his eyes and sat up with a start. The stove had burned low and the lamps had gone out, but outside bells were ringing everywhere. Christmas had come.
One seems to hear words of good cheer from everywhere, filling the air. Oh, how they come, raising the sound, oh, how good, telling it, and filling the ring, while people sing songs of good cheer. Christmas is here. Ding, merry, merry, merry Christmas. Ding, merry, merry, merry Christmas. Ding, when they send home with their deck, beautiful toy, ding, merry, oh, long are the bells, sweet silver bells, all seem to say, broken away. Christmas is here, bringing a cheer to young and old. Ding, get them all, ding, dong, ding, dong, bells is their song, ring, joyful ring, long, heavenly. One seems to hear words of good cheer from everywhere, filling the air. Oh, how they come, raising the sound, oh, how they good, telling it, filling the ring, while people sing songs of good cheer. Christmas is here. Ding, merry, merry, merry Christmas. Ding, merry, merry, merry Christmas. Ding, when they send home with their deck, ding, joyful tone, ding, merry, oh,
Long boys and on with a head, their joyful tone to every home.
ding, dong, ding, dong.
"That was Jesus," said the old man to himself. "Perhaps it was just a dream. No matter, I will watch and hope that he will come visit me today. But how shall I know him? He was not always a little boy. He grew up to be a man. Some people said he was God himself." Papa Panov stared out of the window. "Dearie, dearie, I shall have to watch very carefully." Papa Panov stayed at the window until the first rays of sun crept up over the hill and twinkled on the stony rooftops. At last a figure came into view, trudging slowly up the long cobbled streets. Papa Panov felt very excited. Perhaps this was Jesus. Then he stepped back, disappointed. It was only the old road sweeper who came each week with his barrow and broom. He was waiting for Jesus. He stepped away from the window, hoping the old man would pass by. But when he turned back, the road sweeper was right outside his little shop, rubbing his hands together and stamping his feet. He did look very cold. Papa Panov felt sorry for him. Imagine having to work on Christmas Day. Papa Panov opened the door of his little shop and called out, "Hey, old chap!" The road sweeper looked around nervously. People were often very rude to him because of his job. But Papa Panov was smiling in a friendly way. "How about a cup of coffee?" he called. "You look frozen to the bone." The road sweeper left his barrow at once. "Don't mind if I do," he said, shuffling into the tiny shop. "It's very kind of you, very kind." Papa Panov poured out a mug of coffee from the pot on the stove. "It's the least I can do," he said over his shoulder. "After all, it is Christmas." The old fellow sniffed. "Well, this is all the Christmas I'll get." As he warmed himself by the fire, thin drifts of steam rose from his damp clothes, making a sour smell in the room. Papa Panov turned to his place at the window and gazed up and down the streets. "Not in the way, am I?" asked the old road sweeper gruffly. "You expecting visitors?" Papa Panov shook his head. "No, well, sort of. I'm watching for someone. Let me explain." "Have you heard of Jesus?" he asked. "The one in the Christmas story," said the old man. "Yes, he's coming today," said Papa Panov. The road sweeper looked at him, astonished. So Papa Panov told him about the voice he had heard in the night. "And that's why I'm watching for him," he said at last. The road sweeper set down his mug and shook his head gloomily. "Well, best of luck," he said, "and thanks for the coffee." And for the first time, he smiled. Papa Panov stood in his doorway and waved as he collected his barrow and shambled up the street. The winter sun was shining brightly and gave a little warmth to melt the slippery ice on the cobblestones. People were beginning to stir, hurrying on their way to visit friends and family. "Merry Christmas, Papa Panov," they called, and the shoemaker nodded and smiled back, but he didn't want to stop and talk that morning. He was waiting for someone else.
We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Good tidings we bring to you and your Queen. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Now bring us a piggy, 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 bring some out near. Good tidings we bring to you and your King. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. For we all like figgy pudding, when we all like figgy pudding, for we all like figgy pudding. So bring some out, bring some out. Good tidings we bring and your King. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And we won't go till we won't go. We won't go till we won't go. And we won't go till we got some. So bring some out here. Good tidings we bring to you and your King. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. A Happy New Year. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
He was just about to go inside and shut his door when something caught his eye. Stumbling along the shadows close to the wall was a young woman carrying a baby. She was very thin, her face was tired, and her clothes were shabby. Papa Panov watched her for a moment, and suddenly he called out, "Hello, why don't you come in and warm yourself?" She looked startled and made as if to run away, but saw the old shoemaker's eyes sparkling behind his little round spectacles. "You're very kind," she said, but Papa Panov shrugged. "No, really," he said. "You just look so cold. Have you far to go?" "To the next village," she replied flatly. "About 4 miles. I used to lodge down at the mill, but I have no money left to pay the rent. So I must go and ask my cousin to take me in. I'm quite alone, you see." "Will you come and share some bread and soup with me?" Papa Panov asked, but the woman shook her head proudly. "Some milk for the child, then." The woman smiled, and Papa Panov stood aside for her to step into his shop. Inside, the woman stood shivering by the stove as Papa Panov warmed some milk and took the baby in his arms. The child chuckled and kicked his feet. "Dearie, dearie," he said, "the poor mite has no shoes." "I've none to give him," said the young woman bitterly. As Papa Panov sat feeding the boy, a thought came into his mind. The tiny shoes he had made so long ago. He lifted them down from the shelf and tried to fit them on the baby's feet. They fitted perfectly. The young woman was overjoyed. "Oh, how can I thank you enough?" she cried. But Papa Panov didn't hear. He was looking out anxiously of the windows. Had Jesus gone by while he was feeding the little boy? "Is something the matter?" asked the young woman kindly. "Have you heard of Jesus, who was born at Christmas?" asked Papa Panov. "He's coming today." And he told her all about the dream. If it was a dream. She listened till he had finished, then patted his hand kindly. "Well, I hope your dreams come true. You deserve it for being so good to me and my baby." And with that, she went on her way. Papa Panov closed the door behind her. He boiled up a big dish of cabbage soup and took his place at the window once again. The hours ticked by. All sorts of people came along, children and old men, beggars and grannies, cheerful people and grumpy people. Papa Panov peered closely at everyone who passed by. To some he gave a smile, to some a nod, and to the beggars a chunk of crusty bread. But Jesus did not come. He began to be afraid. Perhaps Jesus had come and he had not recognized him. Perhaps he'd hurried past when Papa Panov had turned away for a second to poke the fire or make his soup. Dusk fell, and gray fog began creeping in again. The old shoemaker sadly lit his lamp and sat down wearily in the great wicker chair. He took down his book to read, but his heart was too heavy, and his eyes were too tired to make out the words on the page.
In the midnight winter, frosty wind made moan. Earth stood hard as iron, water like a stone. Snow had fallen, storm, snow on snow. In the bleak winter, long ago. What can I give him, poor as I am? If I were a shepherd, I would bring a lamb. If I were a wise man, I would do my part. Yet what can I give him? Give my heart.
It was only a dream after all, said Papa Panov to himself sadly. I wanted so much to believe that he would come. And two great tears welled up behind his spectacles and filled his eyes so that he could hardly see. At once it seemed as if there was someone else in the room. Through his tears, Papa Panov seemed to see a long line of people passing through his shop. The road sweeper was there, and the young woman with her baby, the grannies, the children, the beggars, all the people he had spoken to that day. And as they passed, they whispered one by one, "Didn't you see me? Didn't you see me, Papa Panov?" "Who are you?" cried the old shoemaker, struggling out of his chair. "Who are you? Tell me." And at once there came the same voice as the night before, though where it came from, Papa Panov could not have said. "I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me water. I was cold, and you took me in. All those people you have helped today, when you are helping them, it's the same as if you were helping me." Then everything was quiet as before. The tears dried in the old man's eyes, and there was no one to be seen. "Dearie, dearie," said Papa Panov slowly, pulling at his long gray mustache. "So he came after all." The old shoemaker shook his head side to side thoughtfully. He smiled the widest smile in the world, and the sparkle came back behind his little round spectacles.
Could have come like a mighty storm, with all the strength of a hurricane. You could have come like a forest fire, with the power of heaven in your flame. But you came like a winter snow, quiet and soft and slow, falling from the sky in the night to the earth below. You could have swept in like a tidal wave, or in an ocean to ravage our hearts. You was still, it was small, it was hidden. Oh, you came like a winter snow, quiet and soft and slow, falling from the sky